An AI hiring platform asked thousands of people for their faces, their voices, their passports, their life stories on camera, and then they lost all of it. 4 terabytes of intimate biometric data, now in the hands of hackers. And here is the thing, you cannot reset your face like a password. Meanwhile, 9,000 miles from Silicon Valley, a United Nations report warns that a conflict in the Middle East is about to drag millions of people into poverty. Not in the war zone, but across Asia and the Pacific. Coming up on Unbreakable Ventures, the Mercor data breach that handed hackers a deepfake training kit, a UNDP report linking the Strait of Hormuz crisis to a global poverty surge, and 5 quick fire stories you need to hear. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of April, 2026. Welcome to Unbreakable Ventures. I am Ollie Law and you are listening to our fortnightly risk update, where we dive into emerging and current risks from around the world, focusing on some big stories and some you may have missed. We use the categories from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report to simplify the threats we are monitoring. But we also do some deep dives and interviews with industry peers. This week, we're launching our fortnightly update on a Wednesday. Typically, we've tried to keep these updates to a Monday, but recently we're noticing the strain on our team, where they're often working a weekend to get it done. But we're also noticing many major news cycles are hitting a Tuesday. Big stories and particularly big Truth Social updates tend to be happening on Tuesday and Wednesdays. Look into that as you wish. It's also worth mentioning most people have more time on a Wednesday to catch up on newsletters, articles and podcasts. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about the world's global threats over the last fortnight. So grab a coffee and let us get into it. Let us start with a story that might not be on your radar yet, but it should be. The United Nations Development Programme has published a new report and its findings are sobering. The ongoing military escalation in the Middle East, centred around the Strait of Hormuz closure and broader regional conflict, is not just a problem for the countries directly involved. It is sending shockwaves across the entire Asia-Pacific region. And according to the UNDP, millions of people could be pushed into poverty as a result. Not over decades, over months. Now, when we hear about the Middle East crisis, we tend to think about oil prices and geopolitics. But this report looks at it through a different lens, specifically the Human Development Index. And it tracks how the crisis radiates outward through channels that most people are not talking about. Think of it like dropping a stone into a pond. The splash is the conflict itself, but the ripples travel a very long way. So what are those ripples? The UNDP identifies 4 main transmission channels. First, direct energy cost inflation. Oil and gas prices surge, and that hits household budgets and industrial output simultaneously. People pay more to cook, to commute, to heat their homes. Factories pay more to produce goods. Second, maritime trade disruption. A significant share of global oil and LNG supplies passes through the Strait of Hormuz. When that route is compromised, the entire global supply chain feels the squeeze. Third, and this one is underreported, it's called remittance flows. Millions of workers from South and Southeast Asia are employed in Gulf states. They send money home to their families, often in rural communities with no alternative income. When those workers face job losses or forced repatriation, that financial lifeline gets cut. And in many of these countries, remittances represent a larger share of GDP than foreign aid. And fourth, tourism revenue. Regional instability deters travel, and for economies that depend on visitors, that is another income stream drying up. Now, who is getting hit the hardest? The UNDP report is very clear on this. Countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and small Pacific Island states. These are oil importing nations. They do not have deep fiscal reserves. They do not have strategic petroleum stockpiles. They do not have diversified energy sources. So even a short duration disruption can trigger food insecurity, power rationing, and social instability. The report describes it as compound shocks, multiple crises hitting simultaneously, each one amplifying the others. And the cruel part is, years of development progress can be reversed in months, but a decade might be needed to claw it back. For businesses listening to this, the implications are real and practical. If your supply chain runs through Southeast Asia, you need to be modelling this. Workforce disruption, demand volatility, absenteeism, potential government interventions like export restrictions or price controls. These are not hypothetical scenarios anymore. The UNDP is calling for coordinated international action. Emergency social protection scaling, targeted energy subsidies, protection of remittance corridors, and accelerated investment in renewable energy. Their message is clear: delayed responses will compound the human cost and make recovery significantly more expensive. So what can you do right now? If you are a business leader, map your exposure to these transmission channels: energy import dependence, remittance flow concentration, tourism revenue reliance, maritime trade route vulnerability. Understand which channels carry the greatest risk for your context. If you are in government or humanitarian work, pre-position emergency cash transfer mechanisms. Get social protection frameworks ready to activate quickly. Speed of deployment matters more than perfection of targeting. And for everyone, this crisis is a structural argument for reducing dependence on fossil fuels from any single region. The long-term answer is energy diversification, but the short-term reality demands contingency planning right now. The UNDP report is a wake-up call. The Middle East conflict is not contained. Its effects are already being felt by the most vulnerable people on the other side of the world.
You are listening to Unbreakable Ventures, a threat intelligence publication by FixInc. Subscribe today via unbreakableventures.com to receive free resource and deep dives from industry experts. Unbreakableventures.com, where resilience is about community and communication. Subscribe today.
Before we move on to our second threat update, we are sharing our quick-fire emerging threats we have picked up throughout the fortnight. These will be noteworthy stories we think you should know about, but less detailed than our two core threats analysed. A new Federation of Small Businesses survey shows UK SMEs are under serious pressure. The Middle East conflict is driving up input costs. Supply chain uncertainty is eroding confidence in supplier reliability. And persistent cash flow problems are pushing many firms toward the brink. When small businesses freeze investment because they cannot trust their suppliers, it weakens the very suppliers they depend on. Airlines are cutting routes and reducing flight frequencies as jet fuel prices surge amid Strait of Hormuz disruption. The impact goes beyond airline balance sheets. Tourism-dependent economies and business travel connectivity are taking a direct hit. Reduced capacity means fewer routes, higher ticket prices, and a potential long-term reshaping of global aviation networks. Australia's strategic fuel reserve ships are now delivering under the government's emergency fuel security scheme. This is a live stress test of a system designed for exactly this scenario. Much like during COVID, when nations studied each other's public health responses, countries are now observing each other's fuel crisis strategies in real time. Australia has noted the Philippines mandating work from home to save fuel, only to discover workers running air conditioning all day, consuming comparable energy. A reminder that logical-sounding mitigations can backfire. Staying in Australia, businesses are slashing employee hours and accelerating remote work as the fuel crisis pushes commuting and operational costs beyond sustainable levels. This may be one of the first early signs of an employment slump setting in. Reduced hours typically precede outright job losses in economic downturns. The risk is that temporary cost-cutting becomes permanent, with businesses choosing not to restore hours when conditions stabilise. And finally, a new industry survey reveals a troubling gap between how confident security leaders feel about ransomware recovery and how well their systems actually perform under pressure. Overconfidence leads to underinvestment in tested, validated recovery processes. Organizations assume their backups and response plans will work without ever subjecting them to realistic, unannounced drills. The message is simple: test your recovery before an attacker tests it for you. Further sources and references can be found in the footnotes of this podcast. But without further ado, let's look at our second threat update this fortnight. Imagine applying for a job where you are required to record a long-form video interview. You upload your passport, your CV, your personal details. You are told this is necessary and that it is part of the process to be eligible for an interview. And then all of it, every frame of your face, every second of your voice, every page of your identity ends up in the hands of hackers. That is exactly what happened to users of Mercor, a Silicon Valley AI hiring startup valued at $10 billion. The hacking group called Lapsus exfiltrated approximately 4 terabytes of data, and what they took is deeply alarming. 211 gigabytes of resumes and candidate profiles, 939 gigabytes of source code, massive folders of passport and identity document scans, and thousands of hours of high-resolution video interviews. This is not just another data breach. This is, in the words of cybersecurity experts, a near-perfect deepfake training dataset. And that distinction matters enormously, because unlike a stolen password, unlike a compromised credit card number, you cannot reset your face, you cannot change your voice, you cannot reissue your behavioral mannerisms. This exposure is permanent. Every single person affected now carries a lifelong vulnerability to identity fraud, deepfake impersonation, and synthetic identity attacks. Now here's where the story gets more complex and frankly more concerning for every business listening. Most of the media coverage has framed this as Mercor's failure. Basic VPN negligence, poor credential hygiene. But that framing is genuinely unfair because this breach did not start at Mercor. It started 3 layers upstream in what security researchers are calling a sophisticated software supply chain attack. The attack chain went like this. First, Trivy, a widely used open source security vulnerability scanner, a tool that thousands of companies trust to catch problems, was itself compromised. That compromise poisoned Light LLM, an AI model proxy layer that sits between applications and AI models. And from Light LLM, the attackers reached Mercor. For those keeping count, that's 3 layers deep, or as we like to say, a fourth-party vulnerability. The tool you trust to find vulnerabilities became the vulnerability. Think about that for a moment. It is like hiring a locksmith to secure your house, and the locksmith is the one who hands a copy of your keys to a burglar. This same supply chain compromise affected thousands of companies simultaneously. Mercor just happened to be sitting on the most sensitive data. And this brings us to the question that I think every business, every platform, every individual needs to confront. How much data is truly necessary? Mercor's business model required applicants to submit extensive video recordings, identity documents, and detailed personal information just to be considered for roles, often roles that involve training AI models for major tech companies. The volume and intimacy of that data collection far exceeded what traditional hiring processes demand. And yet the security infrastructure protecting it was ultimately dependent on a chain of third-party tools that no single entity fully controlled or audited. So who should be worried? First, anyone who submitted data to Mercor. You need to assume your biometric information is in hostile hands, monitor for identity fraud, alert your financial institutions, and understand that standard credit monitoring is not enough, because this is not a credit card problem. It is a biometric problem. Second, any organization using video-based identity verification, banks, corporate security teams, government agencies. If you rely on video, know your customer checks, or voice authentication or liveness detection, your threat model has fundamentally shifted. This dataset gives attackers precisely the training material to defeat those systems. You need to layer biometric checks with behavioral analytics, device binding, cryptographic attestation, and human-in-the-loop review for high-risk transactions. No single authentication factor, especially one that cannot be changed, should ever be treated as definitive. Third, any company relying on open-source security tools. And let us be honest, that is almost everyone. The Trivy to Light LLM to Mercor attack chain is a structural warning. You cannot trust tools by reputation alone. You need continuous verification of third-party software integrity. Code signing validation, software bill of materials monitoring, runtime behavioral analysis. Your security scanner is an attack surface. Treat it as one. And fourth, this breach forces a reckoning for every AI-era platform that collects extensive personal data. The question is stark. Is this data truly necessary for the service being provided? If it is not essential, stop collecting it. If it is essential, segregate it. Encrypt it with dedicated key management. Impose strict retention limits. Because the Mercor breach proves something we all need to accept. Data you hold is data that can be stolen. And biometric data, once stolen, creates a liability that lasts a lifetime. The era of trusting platforms with intimate data based solely on their valuation or their investor backing should be over. This story circles back to a fundamental question. How much of ourselves are we willing to give away to achieve the things we want? What is fair, and what must be done to protect it? For the affected users of Mercor, those questions are no longer theoretical. They are deeply, permanently personal.
That's it for today's update. If you need help navigating these threats or building a plan to protect your business, the same advisors who collate these insights are here to help. Head over to unbreakableventures.com to book a complimentary chat online with one of them. And if you found this resource useful, consider subscribing to Unbreakable Ventures or sharing the article with your network. After all, resilience is about community and communication. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, stay safe.
Unbreakable Ventures is brought to you by the Senior Advisory Team at Fixing, a boutique resilience advisory based in the Oceania, ASEAN and India regions. Special thanks to our sponsor and Europe's leading SaaS provider for resilience software, F24. Our resources are researched and published by industry specialists across New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia and the UK. This podcast provides advice and opinion on disaster recovery and the threat landscape. The content is not a substitute for expert guidance during a crisis. Unbreakable Ventures is trademarked by Fixing Consulting Partners, a Fixing Group company.